Okay, welcome back, Silver Bull fans. Welcome back to Silver Bull channel. Um, we are seeing some interesting things in the Republican presidential race. Um, the way I look at it is one down, Michelle Bachmann gone, and some others to go. So long as Ron Paul is still in it, we just got to keep looking at it that you got to get rid of those non-Ron Paul people there one by one. And I'm not too worried at this stage about some of the allegations of vote fraud and that. Um, I, the media, the mass media may, after New Hampshire or whatever, try to write Ron Paul off. But I think his organisation is one that's in for the whole race, and I think the Republican establishment are kidding themselves if they can think they can just get rid of him or marginalise him without destroying their own party. That's my view on it. All right, where is Iran? All right, Iran is smack bang in the Middle East. It's a nation of 78 million people, largely mountainous, as you can see from the Google Earth map here. From the air, it looks somewhat desert-like. Certainly not as lush as something like the Ganges Valley or whatever. Obviously, there are places there that grow food in that. They have some major river systems in that, but I won't go into all that. It's right next door to Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia. It's got Afghanistan there, some former Soviet republics here, biggest one being Kazakhstan, of course, and its major capital cities up here, Tehran, and that's home to about 14 million people, so it's a pretty sizable city by anyone's standard. You got some other interesting places around: Armenia, Azerbaijan, Turkey, and it also borders onto the Caspian Sea there. Another interesting thing, of course, is how close it is to Israel, and it's not a next door neighbour. You've got Iraq, Jordan, and Syria in between. As far as I'm aware, Iran has never directly ever attacked Israel. However, it would be alleged through its sponsorship of terrorist groups. It has, and particularly in Syria and in Palestine and places like that, that it has damaged Israel that way. Some would say quite effectively, and it is a mainly Shiite Muslim country. 98% of its population is Shia Muslim. Its next largest religious group is Baha'is, and they've been persecuted and executed there on a regular basis. There are also some Jews and Christians and Zoroastrians there. Iran's history, most Westerners would probably know it as Persia. That's what it used to be. It was part of the Persian Empire that was conquered by Alexander the Great. That was the probably last time that a Western power truly conquered it. It's had small periods of occupation of Western powers. For example, the British occupied it during the Second World War, and as they occupied much of the area to keep it out of German and Axis hands. But it wasn't a war in the sense of like Alexander the Great coming in. The West hasn't always had a winning time in Persia. When the Romans attacked it, it was known then as the Parthian Empire. And one of the Roman rulers who came there and lost all his legions famously died by having molten gold poured down his throat. So he came conquering, looking for riches, and they gave him riches. They poured molten gold down his throat. So that taught the West at that time not to fuck with the Parthian Empire, as it was called then. Sorry to use that language, but I mean, pouring molten gold down someone's throat is pretty horrific. So, it was to send a very clear message to the Roman Empire that they'd found their eastern boundary, as it was, and Rome never did conquer the Parthian Empire. It's gone under a number of transformations. The Mongols came through that area and really killed a lot of people. So its last major invasion, where there was a huge slaughter, was from the east. And of course, this century it's had a number of problems. I won't go into that, there's just too many, but obviously they've involved coup d'etats, overthrows, government oppression, still ongoing, very volatile country, and that sort of governance. Doesn't matter who's in charge, there always seems to be problems. Certainly, if you think Iraq has been bad for America and that they were there for 10 years and they still haven't got it politically stable, it would be a cakewalk compared to Iran, because there's just so many competing groups. Mainly they're all Persian, so it's not so much a racial issue, though there are, you've got some Armenians in there, you've got some Kurds who'd like to have their own Kurdish nation. There's a whole bunch of Kurds here who'd like to take a bit of Syria, a bit of Turkey, a bit of Iran and Iraq, and have a Kurdistan nation in there. Also, Armenians would like a bigger nation there as well. So it's quite a naturally volatile region. And of course, to confuse it all, you throw in Israel. And yes, a missile coming from Iran into Israel, you'd have a very limited response time, and that's what some people are worried about. They're worried about Iran being nuclear armed and wanting to take Israel out. Now, I've said that's highly unlikely, even if they were nuclear armed, that they would do that. Because to do that, if we can bring up Israel here, here's the Dead Sea, slowly shrinking because they're diverting so much water from it. You're dealing with a very actually small area here. They say in a jet fighter to go from one side of Israel to the other only takes 4 minutes. So, it's a very narrow strip of land. When you're talking about stuff like jet fighters and that, it's very, very small. There's Jerusalem. Were you to nuke Jerusalem, where a bunch of Muslims live as well, you're going to kill Muslims as well. You're going to have fallout. Gaza Strip is just down here. You've got a whole millions of Muslims living right there. In fact, Israel as a nation has about 1 million Arabs in it. So there is no way you could nuke Israel and not cause death to millions of Muslims. And it would be to no one's benefit to turn this into a huge wasteland. No Muslim would thank a Iranian government for doing it. In fact, they would condemn them for it. Nuclear weapons aren't. They don't discriminate. If you were to nuke Tel Aviv, you can see how close these other cities are. Just depending which way the wind was blowing, you'd have these people taken out. Or if your missile isn't that accurate and it was to land off course, it's just an unrealistic thing to say if Iran has nuclear weapons, even if they say, oh, we're going to nuke Israel, that it would ever be a practicable thing to do. because you're gonna just you got all your Arab neighbours here. You're gonna cause problems too as well. No one would thank Iran for doing that. Um, so I don't think it's a likelihood. Even if they had nuclear weapons, which they're a member of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. They do have a neighbour that has nuclear weapons. Pakistan has nuclear weapons. It's a Muslim country. It's got fanatical Muslims in as well who say they want to destroy the West. Their own army's been cracking down on it. We don't hear the same language from these war hawks or chicken hawks in the Republican Party about Pakistan, yet it is a nuclear armed nation. I don't know why they get so paranoid about Israel. Israel has at least 400 nuclear weapons. Iran's population is urbanized. In its top 10 cities, you could wipe out a whole bunch of its population if you wanted to. And any nuclear attack on Israel would be a death sentence for Iran as well. The theory of MAD, mutually assured destruction, got us through the Cold War. There is no reason why that same philosophy, the MAD theory, wouldn't work in a Iran-Israel confrontation. They're talking about Iran putting things in suitcase nukes, and maybe putting a small nuke in, so you could have a targeted nuke. Well, one, you're not going to do so much damage in that case, and two, you'd still have massive retaliation from Israel, and it would wipe Iran off the face of the earth. So it wouldn't achieve your goals either. I just think it's very unrealistic. Now, the EU sanctions and the American sanctions stopping Iran from exporting its major goods, which is oil, obviously. And Iran is threatened to cut off the Strait of Hormuz, which is this narrow strait here. 20% of the world's oil goes through that strait, okay? Were it to be blocked off, oil prices would skyrocket. I can't understand why Europe's wanting to go along with these oil sanctions other than the fact they're tied to the US Federal Reserve, giving them so much money and keeping their Eurozone dream afloat at this time. The simple fact of the matter is by pushing up oil prices as they are, they're damaging their own economy. So these sanctions are actually hurting the West as much as they would be hurting Iran. Now, some people would say, well, Iran can just export to China more. And indeed, they do export a lot to China, but China's playing hardball at the moment. They're actually cutting their imports of oil from Iran because they're not happy with the terms of trade. The Chinese are very clever business people, and they know this is a time to screw Iran down because it's got very few other customers it can sell to. So the Chinese want the best price possible, and should China get access to huge amounts of cheap oil from Iran at ridiculously low prices because it's the only one who can buy them, and let's be honest, the US is not going to impose sanctions on China for buying Iranian oil. That's just not going to happen, and neither is Europe for that matter. Let's recognise the reality of it. China's untouchable by the West. Worst case scenario is China goes back to what China has done for the vast majority of its history, closes down its borders and say, well, we'll just look after ourselves. And, that's not going to be good for anyone. Certainly not going to be good for the 1 billion people who live in China. We also have a nation here of another 1 billion people, that's India. Pakistan and Bangladesh aren't small nations either. it's a big part of the world, and for a nation on the other side of the world, I'm not talking about Israel, but we go all the way. If we get this to work, sorry about this. We've got Europe there. We've got to go all the way to the other side of the world. There we go. To get to the United States of America. America used to have a philosophy, and this is what helped propel its path to greatness, that we let the other parts of the world look after themselves, and we'll look after America, i.e., no other nation was in Europe was allowed to influence what was going on in North or South America. They drove the Spanish out because they wanted their sphere of influence to be here. And America, by doing that, didn't have the cost of empires and was able to invest in its own growth and become the superpower that it became. The problem now is it's falling into the same mistake the Roman Empire did. And you have basically this almost lone political voice of Ron Paul saying, no, let's concentrate on our own country, bring the troops home, instead of having them spend all that money overseas. Could you imagine all those troops coming home and spending their wages in the United States? That alone is going to stimulate the economy. He's not talking about having a smaller army. People seem to be crapping on that he's anti-safety of America. No, you're actually more safer by having your troops at home, being able to protect you at home, and then respond to what's going on around the world. In this day and age where America, you think about Desert Storm. It was only a couple months that it took America to build up enough troops to invade Iraq the first time around in Desert Storm. America has shown it can very quickly deploy anywhere in the world if it needs to. There's no advantage by having these bases all around the Middle East there. No advantage at all. Anyhow, this is a very long video now. Thanks to Google Earth, I'm sure they won't mind me using it because obviously they get a share of the advertising revenue. It's Google revenue. But there's Iran, and I personally don't think it's worth going to war over. End of story.